All right, we're back yet again to the many faces of Carlton Riffle. Let me say this to kick it off. If you don't check out the YouTube occasionally, I was going to say guarantee. That's not the right word. I highly recommend that you
Recommend,
do.
yeah.
Yeah, just to check out what Carlton's got going on. There's always something different. What's going on, Carlton? How you doing?
Oh, pretty good. Just thought I'd try to get you smiling on this nice afternoon.
Yeah,
A little
this
warm in my loft. I gotta admit, I just refused to turn the air on today, and it's
are you doing?
temperatures
Have
are
you had any
going up.
other like self torture? Last week you were embedding ticks in your stomach. This week it's like sweatshop. What's going on
No,
over there?
I'm gonna do some stump grinding
Oh my
this
gosh.
this weekend. So
Yeah.
looking forward to that. I might make it over to Derek's house and grind some of his stumps.
Good for you.
So,
That's you know, speaking of, you asked about things that are exciting. One thing I have to just say right off the top here, I was looking at our show analytics, and one
oh,
thing I'm very excited about is whoever the 100 or so listens over the last couple of weeks that are coming from down under, mate.
hmm.
We've got we've got a
I'll try it, but then I'll end up in like a
yeah,
British accent
it
for
went sideways quick, but we've got some people now. I feel like that's a now, now,
Ooh,
some Aussies in the house. And
nice.
let me say this: if you're listening to this episode, I would love to literally hear from you. Please email me, adam@straffire.com. I would love to know who you are or what you do, how you discovered this show. I was just looking at it and I was like, what in the world? I mean, I'm super happy that
Yeah.
you're
If
here
they
and
have a
have your
kangaroo, pet kangaroo.
right, exactly. Just so many questions, but mainly just would love to have you. And listen, Aussies have the coolest accent in the world, so you could literally
Yeah.
do any job, and I would love to have you on the show just
Just a
to
guest
talk to you.
section just for your
Absolutely,
accent. There we go.
absolutely, no doubt about it.
Standing
But
invite to all of our Australian friends.
my
Are
light
you all
just
right?
fell.
Did you
Yeah, my
see
light
the
just fell again. Another reason to watch. All right, so the
Don't
Aussie thing
forget
is
about
going
Jim
on.
too. You need to have Jim. Jim
Oh, that's
needs
true.
to
We do
use
need to have
pause
Jim
and
on.
start as well. There you go.
Yeah, we do need to bring the international component to it. Speaking of international, anywhere you are in this entire world, you can be a part of the community by leaving us a 5-star review. We are just crossed over 70 last week, on our way to 100. And each week I am just featuring a new one. So right before we get to the episode with Keith, got to talk to you about this one. It comes from Anna Got 12. The title is Actionable, Helpful Look at All Kinds of Content. 5 stars. This podcast features so many different kinds of entrepreneurs and business owners who have reached success in different ways and with different backgrounds. I always tune in for actionable tips that you can take away to grow your business. The hosts are exceptional. I mean, thank you.
Oh
That's why
wow.
we read these and ask smart questions and seem to have a great rapport with the guests on the show. This is one of the only must listen to podcasts on my list, and I'll never miss an episode. Thank you, Anna Got, for that 5-star review. If you haven't left a 5-star review yet and you're listening to this, you hear the sound of my voice, please go do so right now. We read them all and you can say whatever you want in them.
You can be famous like Anna.
We are libertarians. So, Carlton, you heard the episode with Keith. What were your thoughts?
So another good episode. Great interviews lately, Adam. And I think he's had a lot of experience. He was at uh, he's been at several different companies that most people have heard of. So I
Bleacher
think he's got
Report, BuzzFeed. Yeah.
He started at BuzzFeed. So a lot of interesting things there that I think people will be interested to hear from. But specifically, what I thought was most intriguing is he brought up this idea of a personal brand and developing a
Mm,
personal brand. And I think there's some people that are like, that doesn't apply to me because I'm not trying to do a personal brand. I'm marketing for my company, right? But that still is applicable to them for the reason that personal brands can be so successful. And that's mainly because it's a relationship that viewers develop with the person presenting that content. When they spend time with that person, when they hear them give good advice and take their advice and it works, that bolsters that relationship with that person, and that person then transfers it or relates it to a brand. So even if you're, in marketing for a company, doing in-house marketing, or maybe for other companies as well, I think there's still a lot of application there because people don't have relationships with just companies; they have it
Mm.
with other people, and that's I think the big takeaway that you can apply from what he talks about and some of the other finer points that he brings, is just thinking about it in the context of developing relationship through content.
Yeah, I thought his thesis of being, even if you are employed somewhere that isn't, your name industries, being a company of one, thinking of yourself as a company of one, and creating advertising content, whatever communication as that company of one for your customers, for your audience, and then leveraging that different ways was really, really important. And it's something that has kind of become normalized, I would say, for especially people who are like 28 and under. It's just how they operate. But for people who are, above that, even there's huge opportunity when you're able to sort of consolidate and become consistent with the areas that you create within, establishing those relationships, whether that be for your job or for something else, and really making authentic connections with people. And then Keith goes into how you can use those connections, what those can build out, and everything else along with it. So yeah, really, really impactful. I loved his just, well, first of all, Keith Hernandez, and I get into this, but like, very famous Hall of Fame baseball player, recurring character on Seinfeld. So there was a lot of just fun stuff around that. And it's cool to see how he has leveraged the fact that that's his name in all of his branding. He uses a baseball term for his business. His podcast is named after a baseball pitch. Like, he's really just leaned into that. And it's pretty funny to see, given where his career's gone. On this episode, we're joined by Keith Hernandez, founder of Launch Angle, host of the Change Up podcast, and not the Hall of Fame New York Met, although he is a fan of his namesake. Despite his Mets fandom, Keith and I had a great conversation. We talked about the lessons he learned building content platforms at Bleacher Report and BuzzFeed. Keith shares his process for identifying where to start your content machine, how to build while working a full-time job, and the single most important question to ask to figure out if building a content platform is right for your business. I thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. I think you will too. Let's dive into this episode with Keith Hernandez. All right, we have got Keith Hernandez from Launch Angle here on the podcast. So excited to have you, Keith. And I can't, as a fan of baseball, as a fan of Seinfeld, as a fan of you, I have to start off the most obvious place.
Yep.
Which came first, your love of baseball or your awareness of Hall of Famer Keith Hernandez? Which of those came first?
It's a good. It happened probably right at around the same time, and I'm going to age myself with this answer because I was 5 years old, 1986. The Mets were running New York City, running the town, and I grew up right outside of New York City in White Plains, New York. And it's really hard not to become a fan of a team where the captain and the leaders has your exact name. It also, didn't hurt that I look, I guess, a little like him. So,
Yeah, for sure.
people in White Plains thought that I was related, either his nephew or something like that. So yeah, and I just always it's one of those things where I wonder how different my life would be if my name was Don Mattingly or Tino Martinez, because at 5 years old it was World Championship, and I was probably like at 5 years old I was like, oh, this is cool, this is going to happen every year. And I don't think they've been close,
Yeah.
but they haven't had anything ever since.
Yeah. So I see the LA, but are you a Mets?
Yeah.
You stick with the Mets now?
100% Mets. Yeah. So this is
Okay. All right.
LA Taco Hat. It's a Los Angeles
Gotcha.
website. And I bought it and rock it because they're a great site, but then it's also the initials for my company, Launch Angle. So I was like, okay, cool. Let me see
Oh,
what
very cool.
very sneaky. I was like, let me see what their merch looks like and how they put together snapbacks as I start
I
to think
love that.
about some of that merchandising stuff as well. But yeah,
Yeah.
tried and true, like thick and thin New York Mets fan for sure.
Yep. Well, I'm a Phillies guy, so we're both. You guys actually have some hope, I think. Still, we're somehow 2 weeks into the season. It's looking bleak, but anyway, it's not a baseball pod, unfortunately.
We can make it happen.
So you mentioned Launch Angle there, and sort of your personal evolution. Maybe you could just give us a quick overview, and I know there's a lot there,
Yeah.
between being at BuzzFeed in the early days and kind of how that transitioned you to where you are and what you're doing now.
Yeah. Yeah. So, got into advertising sales, like I think most people by accident, right? Like when I was 5 years old, 6 years old, I had no idea that this was an actual role that somebody can do, which is like go out
Right.
there and have conversations with people about brand partnerships. And the through line through my entire career was working with companies that I just believed in their editorial and believed in their mission and their vision of creating great original work. And so I've
Mhm.
always been, I say, like the biggest cheerleader in that. And where that really kind of came to fruition was at BuzzFeed, right? BuzzFeed was, at the time when I joined there, was early 2012, a very small company, under 100 people. Still, it still is known for its cats and its listicles, but at the time, Ben Smith hadn't even started yet.
Mm.
And we were really selling this dream that advertising can be better, content can be better. You can work with us and we can create something that not only people will click on, but people will laugh and enjoy and actually share with their friends, right? Like, can you imagine a world, we're saying this in 2012, 10 years ago, where people actually aren't interrupted with advertising. They're actually seeking it
Mm.
out because we're creating it in such a way. And that stuck with me, right? Like that ethos has stuck with me for everything else that I've done in my career because I really believe it, right? Like advertising doesn't have to stink. It doesn't have to be annoying. It doesn't have to be intrusive. It can be a lot of fun. And we're really seeing that evolution happen now, with influencers on TikTok and Snapchat creating like a completely different vibe for how
Mm.
advertising is and how people connect with advertising. So that through line was there. And, that's, my last kind of full-time job before starting Launch Angle was at Bleacher Report, helping them build out the branded content studio there. Um, when I joined, they had a branded content team, but they hadn't really figured out the science to what's going to work for them. And we
Mhm.
kind of built this idea around the intersection of sports and culture, right? Like the sports fan doesn't necessarily, like you and I are old school. We're like, we love our Phillies and we love our Mets, but like the younger fan is going to follow Kyrie Irving anywhere
Mm.
he goes, right? The younger fan is more interested in what LeBron James' next move is off the court, as well as what he's doing on the court. And so we started to create that branded content studio in that realm, and it really
Mm.
started to take off.
Yeah, just as a sports fan, I mean that is such a a novel, or I don't know, non obvious concept to me.
Right.
If you grew up in a city, I feel like if you grew up in even just a region that had a team, you followed them through everything. And now people are so transient, like you said, that the players obviously move around so much that that's changed. But I think what you all were able to do at BuzzFeed, and then what you've continued to do, is use those cultural moments to build owned media, as opposed to, like, the sports teams that I grew up with. You follow the Inquirer, you follow the Daily News, whatever. They're always renting or borrowing attention on behalf of the city's team. What you all did
Exactly.
was made a destination, regardless of the team, regardless of the athlete, even, right? That was interesting. So, what went into that thinking of making this a destination, and then how do you apply that to the people that you work with now?
Yeah. So, this is an insight that was found before I started at Bleacher Report. So I'll give some credit to people like Doug Bernstein and, one of the founders, Dave Finocchio, who they started to notice that, like, when we were young, you had to watch ESPN sometimes twice to get the highlights for your
Hmm.
team, right? Like you might have missed them, right? Like if you put on your TV at 11 o'clock or 11:04, they might have shown the Phillies Mets highlight at 11:02, and you just watch a half an hour and got nothing. Right. So that's how we grew
So
up,
many
and that was
times.
frustrating. But
Yeah.
now you can get the scores and the stats anywhere, right? Like
Hmm.
at the touch of a phone, you can get any of that stuff. And so
Hmm.
what the insight that those folks had was, we don't need to be the scorers and the standings. What we need to be is the stories beyond these athletes. Like we're noticing people are caring more about the Instagram handles and the Twitter handles of these athletes and these celebrities and these business partners. And so what we should do is really cater towards that, right? We'll let ESPN own the scores and the highlights, and we'll come in with kind of the fun, interesting facts about these players so that you can kind of develop more camaraderie and more kinship towards the athletes. And we did see
Hmm.
exactly what you mentioned. When we start to look at the analytics of our audience, we were seeing, people were more interested in following the players than the teams, and people would get jerseys, right? Like one of my favorite, like Kyrie, I talk about a lot because he makes you talk about him a lot. But
Yeah,
there's a
yeah,
great
you have
picture of
to.
him like in Utah, and there's like 5 kids with Kyrie jerseys waiting for him to sign things, and it's like, Utah has a team, the Jazz. They're
Right,
pretty good.
right.
Why do these kids love Kyrie? And Steph Curry was another great example, right? Steph Curry became this universal player, and we just started to see that, and we started to see that with engagement. We started to test out putting things on social that were more athlete driven versus team driven, and it
Hmm.
was just getting so much more response. So many more conversations were happening. So much more sharing was happening, and so they looked at that and said, "Oh, we really hit on something here. This makes sense."
So then how does that translate to um, the non-sports realm, right? Because
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of people who are still creating within sports or not, uh, or athletes, obviously, who are launching their own platforms. But there's a lot of people who are not, who might be starting a brand or creating a media platform. What is the thinking like when it's not just centered around an athletic personality?
Yeah, the same thing that is happening with athletes is happening with all of us, which is this notion that your daytime job, right? Like for athletes, that's the 2.5 hours are on the court, or the 4 hours that they're on the baseball field, is just a sliver of who you actually are, and that
Mm,
there's an opportunity to share more and to have a deeper conversation and to do more, right? And so the athletes have gone from being just athletes and just being on the court and we don't know anything about them, to now being their own brands, to this next evolution to being their own businesses that are
mm,
investing in things. And so what we're seeing is that's also happening with individuals, in collectives and influencers, right? What we're seeing is a lot of people realizing that, okay, my 9 to 5 job is, I'm at Goldman Sachs. Let's use Goldman Sachs. It's a fun one. I'm at Goldman Sachs, but I'm the CEO of Goldman Sachs. I also DJ.
mhm.
and,
Right.
and like he was headlining Coachella. I also DJ. I also have an Instagram handle. And what we're starting to see is like this blending of everything, where the boundaries and the lines have kind of been blurred, so that we all can become brands ourselves. And eventually I
Mhm.
think that leads to the next part: we all will become our own businesses, right? Like, and we're starting to see that with a lot of people as they've grown their brand personality and grown their own kind of external forces. They've been able to turn that into a business and make money off of it.
Yeah, just as a sidebar, I just saw after we're recording this middle of the first round of the NBA playoffs, after the Sixers game last night, the all over Twitter there was announcements that James Harden has invested into a beard products brand, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, man, that's such a unique cultural moment where obviously there's a ton of attention on him and on the team,
Yeah.
and I'm sure he's focused on the game or whatever, but his team is working and ready, so that right when the moment that everyone is online or watching the game, they know to make an announcement to leverage that about the thing that he's known for, his iconic beard. It's just like all of this mesh of not just his play on the court, to your point, but his beard, now his business's interest, and all these different things that whatever, even 10 years ago, I think probably would have been looked down on, frankly. Like to make
Absolutely.
a business announcement during the playoffs would have been thought of as like, you're not focused. Now it didn't even make a ripple in terms of like nobody thought that. It was all positive, the feedback. But and I'm wondering if that will eventually translate to the workforce. Like you mentioned Goldman Sachs. Obviously, if you're the CEO of Goldman Sachs, you do whatever you want. But
Yeah.
if you're marketing manager at Apple, and then you have this YouTube series, I think there can be at times a little bit of a, is he committed,
Right.
is she focused, like these types of ideas. Are you seeing that, or
Yeah.
is that even a concern?
Yeah, it's funny because I've talked to a lot of people who are, part of Launch Angle is we consult and coach people who are kind of building out their own brands and building out their own things. And it is one of those things, as funny as it sounds, um, it's easier to do if you're starting a new job. Come in and say, hey, by the
Mm,
way, I would love to do this. I would love to be a marketing manager. Just FYI, I have a podcast. I have a YouTube show. I make a little money on the side, on Instagram. That's part of my, like, I have this LLC. What I found is so many people are able, companies now just go, okay, that's cool. We get it.
yeah,
Like, you,
yeah,
as long as you juggle everything, especially now that we're all working from home, or
right.
working in different times of the day, as long as you get your job done, let's do it. What's harder is people who try to start that while they're at that company. They're
Mm.
a director or marketing manager somewhere, and they kind of go and ask their boss, like, hey, can I want to do this podcast, and I'm thinking about doing these things. That's when they get met with a, well, your performance review, like I really want you to focus on this.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
my advice to people, I usually have a much bigger beard, is, my joke whenever I started a job, I would always have like a big bushy beard, because like then I could have anything.
Yeah.
Right,
You can
rather
always
than
take it
coming
off,
clean
but you
shaven.
can't add it.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And
Yeah.
that's what I say to people, is like, start the thing before you take that job, so then you
Yeah.
can kind of use that. Because again, like, this, not just like content creation, but like investments, advisories, all of those types of things, it's a lot easier to come into a new company and say, hey, I'm doing all these other little things on the side, but of course I can manage this full-time job, than to
Right.
start to ask for permission from a job that you've already taken. Hey, I want to add on things.
Yeah.
So that's my general advice there.
So, Keith, one question I've have is you talk about the individual mixing, their professional life, their creative pursuits, and then in the sense of an athlete, potentially monetizing that, or having a business component to that. Have you given consideration to Web3? Have you studied that, or how does that play into the mix of what you recommend?
Yeah, I'm cautiously optimistic about Web3, but I'm kind of steering clear of where it is right now and trying to learn. Right, I
Hmm.
think our industry, and I think it's gone a little too overboard, but our industry on the advertising and marketing side, so many people, I think 10, 20, 30 years ago, realized that they were slow to the game and didn't jump into the next trend, and they got left behind. Right, so like,
Mm.
you look back and like, let's go all the way back to like when it was just like portals. It was like MSN and Yahoo, and then search came around, and Google and Yahoo took over. There's so many companies that were like, no, our strategy is portals, we're going to get on portals, but
Hmm.
they lost their company because they didn't get into search. And then the next thing happened
It's a
where
great
it moved into
analogy.
social, and now, okay, Facebook and Twitter are taking off, and so many companies were like, we don't need a Facebook page, we don't need a Twitter page, and they lost out. And so
Yeah.
the lesson there, which is right, is you need to embrace the future. You need to embrace these products and learn from them, so that you're not left behind. Right? We've seen like companies that have lasted for 100 years get left behind because they don't pick these things up.
Hmm.
However, I think we've gone a little overboard where people are jumping into these things way too soon with too
Mm.
much energy, and then it just looks like, they're riding a wave and doing it. So I get concerned. Web3, I see the potential there for things like, one of the ways that I've kind of started to understand Web3 that I love is just like, say there's an indie band that wants to throw a concert. They can kind of put the tickets on the blockchain, and through that you can potentially get backstage passes. Through that you
Yeah.
can get like a meet and greet, but also you can get like a special NFT ticket. But then you can get invited to other things and start to build a real community of fans, right? Like, that makes a ton of sense to me, that like a fan club can become decentralized and can kind of start and can kind of build this community that way. What I don't
Hmm.
necessarily get right now is these 8-bit NFTs, and I'm trying to
Mm.
figure that out in a way that makes sense. And again, the potential there, I think we're at this kind of like, we're at this early stage where people are just trying to figure it out. So I'm not going to like knock them for trying to figure it out. And I love that they're tinkering. But what concerns me is if like a big CPG brand like announces a weird NFT that's going to go on Web3, that's going to be part of a metaverse, and you're like, that's so much friction when all I
Right.
want to do is buy your potato chips, right? like
Right.
like why
Right.
are you
Yeah.
why are you doing all this? So that's like, when I talk to people about that type of stuff, I know a lot of people that are experts on it, and I say you should talk to them. They know way more
Yeah.
than me. But for me, I'm still learning. I'm still trying to process it. I'm still trying to understand it. And
Hmm.
if I were making recommendations to brands, I'd say slow down on it right now, because it's in a very frothy stage that people are still trying to figure it out. Like, go, if
Yeah.
you're going to go into it, don't go into it thinking, well, this is how we're going to make our next multi-billion-dollar product. Go into it with a, this is interesting, this is fascinating, let's be part of the tinkering community that's trying to figure this out. If you
Hmm.
take that approach, you're gonna be much happier with the end result. If you go into it thinking you're gonna make millions off of it, you're probably gonna get disappointed.
Yep. It reminds me so much. Well, first of all, the company that you described, the ticket company, friend of the show, Harold Hughes, is making that at Bandwagon. That's what his
Oh,
startup does. So
it's an
shout
awesome
out,
company.
shout out,
Good
shout out,
job,
Harold.
good job, Harold. You got a good idea there.
100%. It reminds me a little bit of the conversation we just had about creating and
Yeah,
content, right? Because if you are coming into it with that expectation of how do I start a content studio in order to blow up or
Right.
whatever, if that's the expectation, versus how do I experiment in this and see if there's new ways to extend our community.
Yep.
Those are two very different playbooks that you're gonna follow. So
Exactly.
totally agree with you there. So we've kind of flirted around it, we've
Sure.
mentioned it now. But what is Launch Angle? Great name,
Yeah.
by the way. Super sticky.
Thanks.
Love it. As
Yeah.
a baseball guy. But yeah, what is it? Unless it just truly is evaluating player swings, which would be the best job ever.
No, yeah, that's part of it, right? Yeah. So the term, let me start with the term launch angle and
Sure.
why it became the company. The term launch angle is essentially a somewhat new baseball term that kind of follows the path of trajectory of the batted ball off the ball off of the bat. And everybody has a different launch angle, right? Like Mike Trout's launch angle is like 36.5, and Pete Alonso's is like 39 degrees. But the idea there is like, if you find your right launch angle, you find the right way to swing and knock the ball out of the park, right? And so
Hmm.
the business translation of that, why I love that so much for the business world, is we are a creative consultancy that works with brands and publishers and agencies to help them find that next breakthrough moment, that next revenue stream that will help supercharge their business, that next project, that next product that's going to help them go there. And so launch angle, our whole pitch is, listen, there's no like blueprint that we're going to follow. There's no movie that we're going to replicate from somebody else. Your launch angle is going to be completely different than somebody else's. We're going to come
I
in
love that.
and investigate the work with you, and we're going to make a recommendation based off of that, and then we're going to do that work with you. So, you know, where we're different from the McKinseys and the Boston Consultings is they have like thousands of people and billions in revenue. But like on the day to day, what they usually do is come in with a 40 to 50 page white paper after talking to
Hmm.
senior executives and hand it over and say, here's what we think you should do. And it's usually like fire 20% of your staff. Here's what you
Yep.
think you should do. Best of luck to you. Like, we'll follow up with you in a year to see how everything goes. We really see that as the beginning of the work relationship, right? That first couple of months is to investigate what we should do. But when we make the recommendation, we make like that recommendation comes with how we're going to add value and how we're going to add input. And that could be
Hmm.
as simple as, we'll help you build the go-to-market strategy. We'll help
Mm.
you talk to the right people and hire the right people to make that happen. We'll help coach and train your current team to better understand the new product. Or we might go out there and help you sell the first couple of deals so that we can get it off
Mm.
the ground and prove it to the C-suite that this is worth something investing in. And that really just depends on what the project is, what the product is, and the appetite. But that for us is kind of the core responsibility. Is we're not going to pitch you on what you should do as a company if we don't feel like we can add value on what that would look like.
Yeah, awesome. I love that, and I love the analogy. I think a lot of folks get caught in strategy and in
Yeah.
it's this ambiguous word and all these things, and having someone who can just help you with the plan but also execute it obviously is uh, ideal.
Yeah.
When you're dealing with, it seems like, I could be wrong, but at least for our purposes, this is an audience of content marketers, creators, et cetera, et cetera. Um, when you're dealing with someone or a company or an agency, and it's time, what part of the recommendation is, you need to create an owned media platform, or you need to begin creating some type of branded content platform. What are some of the steps that you advise people to work through as they're processing all of that?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think one of the first big ones right off the bat is the commitment level, right? Like, you know, so many people like look at branded content as table stakes, right? Like, we're a
Hmm.
publisher, we're a media company, we should have a branded content studio. And my first question is, great, should you? Like, what's the
Mm.
commitment level here? Is it something that, and it's really digging in with the leadership team to kind of figure out, do you just want to tell people that you have a branded content studio? Do
Mm.
you just want to kind of check a box with, is your sales team asking for it, and you don't necessarily want to do it? What's that commitment level and that investment level to really see this thing through? Unfortunately, what I found is a lot of smaller places, they say they have a branded content studio and it's actually just like one person that's like
Yeah.
unfortunately working 80 hours a week and trying to get as many decks out as possible. And they might have, a few freelancers that they call on to kind of help them out. So I ask them pretty real, like, let's talk about that commitment level into what's being built here. Okay, great. You have commitment to it. Amazing. Like, why now do you
Mm.
want this branded
Hmm.
content studio? Because again, like, so many people, like, if the motivation is like, well, we heard that there's big revenue in this and there's great opportunity, and it's like, you need a little bit more. Like,
Yeah.
what's your voice? What's your reason and rationale for having a studio? How is your voice and how is your POV on the marketing world going to differentiate yourselves out there? Because even the best brands, right, like a New York Times, an Atlantic, Washington Post, like even those big brands have to like differentiate in the market and say this is
Yeah.
why we exist versus some of the other ones. And so, again, that table stakes thing, it's true. Like, there's a couple hundred branded content studios out there now. How are you going to create content that's different? And then we get into the conversations on, usually, well, we're going to do it faster, we're going to be more agile, we're going to do it more cost efficient. And unfortunately I have to go, are you, like, how how are you going to do that, right? Like, because there's, and this is like a, I'm not trying to be mean to them, I just want to educate them that the branded content and content creation is hard. It may look easy, because they'll see great work out there and they'll see big numbers out there, but it's a really hard craft and a really hard practice. And I just want them to know that it's not set up the studio and it's off to the races, that it's a
Mm.
really difficult market, it's a really competitive market, and the best players are the ones that are deliberate and have a real differentiated point of view and are not the most cost efficient or fastest, right? Like, those can't be one and two. If you're out there selling, it has to be that differentiated voice.
Yeah, it's so interesting because so many of the, I would say, whatever you would call it, branded content studios, or even just the desire to create something like that comes from, oh, we want to be like, the biggest red flag for me is we want to be the insert media company for this industry. So
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to say the one that comes to my mind because I know too many examples of it, but so we want to be the, whatever, the Axios of marketing. We want to be the HBO of, supply chain, whatever. And what is often left out of that equation is the unscalable work that's
Mm-hmm.
done, at the early stages of those companies. The one I was going to say, I don't mind, is we want to be the Barstool of whatever, right? I feel like that gets
Right.
thrown around so much right now.
Yeah.
And well, Barstool was like pretty whatever for like 15 years or something like that.
Exactly.
So, and took a ton of investment, a ton of man hours. So yeah, that why behind it, and the differentiators to your is so important. Has
Yeah, that shortcut thing. Sorry,
say it
that
again?
shortcut thing. The shortcut, right? Like, so many companies want to kind of create that shortcut. Because I wrote it down when you said HBO. I was like, it took HBO 10 years to become the HBO that we know, right? It took,
Yeah.
I think they were around 89, 90, and then it wasn't until 98, 99 when Sex and the City and Sopranos actually hit that they became known as a prestige cable company, right? Before
Wow.
that, if you went on there, it was Def Comedy Jam. It was like, all these shows that were shot really cheaply, and like with like, shaky cams that, like, other networks didn't necessarily want. And when they hit it was when they found those shows and they started to find their content voice, right? They
Hmm.
started to kind of
Hmm.
understand who they are. And Barstool's the same way, right? Like, don't love their content, but like, I appreciate their business, man. Like
Yeah.
seeing some of their numbers, like, they know how to monetize what they got, and they know how to figure out how to reach that audience, and they know how to continue to create. Like, they have such a good system of farming, of like farming their talent into
Hmm.
superstars, and like,
Hmm.
that's what people should emulate and look at, because
Yeah,
that they
it's
do a
easy
fantastic
because
job of it.
their style is still to some degree shaky cam, raw, whatever, which makes it
Yeah,
seem um, less than thought through, I guess. But it's
yeah,
not. It's yeah. There's a reason to what they do and the controversy, all of it. And so I think a lot of that gets left out when folks are like, yeah, let me dive in. We've talked a lot about kind of like the dark side of it. What do you see as the up? You know what I mean, like the
yeah.
negs. But what do you see as the upside for folks who are considering launching in, diving into
Oh
creation?
man, when you get it right, it is the best feeling in the world. And it just carries, right? So I'll go all the way back to, man, this is like 2012 or 2013 at BuzzFeed. We did this thing for Purina. It's like, it's still in my mind because it was so good. Zay Frank, who was our head of video, we created these ads where an older cat is showing the young cat around the house and like walking them through these things. And it was a beautiful 3-minute branded content video that had the Purina cat food in it, and it got like tens of million. I think it ended up with like 30 or 40 million views,
Wow.
of which like almost all of them were organic. And one of the best parts, it was like the best recruiting tool, because one of my clients, which was Google at the time, their VP of marketing like wrote this comment and like used it in our ad materials afterwards. He was like, I know this is an ad and I don't really like cats, but I've shared this like 20 times today.
That's
Because
amazing.
it was gold. It was absolutely gold. And we like knew we had struck something, and we knew that we were like capturing something in the zeitgeist. So like that feeling I'm always trying to capture again, right? Of, can we create something that everyone knows is an ad? Everyone knows we're trying to get them to buy something else, but they don't care because it's so fun,
Yeah.
and entertain them in such a fun way. When you do that, you feel like you're at the top. So like that's the best part of it, right? Is
Mhm.
kind of creating that. And it's so much more like, I've worked in ad sales my whole career. It's so much more fun talking creatively to people, and
No. Yeah.
kind of getting them excited about different things than to talk about KPIs and analytics and viewability and third party verification, right? Like, you still need to do all that stuff, but like I would way rather spend my time talking to somebody about, can we create something fun and interesting that we can show our friends?
Yeah, it's just the humanity of story, and everyone wants to tap into that versus,
Yeah.
I mean, the data matters, of course, but
Yeah.
when you compare the two, back to your love, your questions that you set out for folks. Has anyone ever thrown that question set back at you specifically? I'm thinking of when you
Yeah.
said the commitment to creation. Anybody use
Yeah.
that in your?
Yeah, I love that you brought that up. Yeah. Yeah, we I've been wearing this on my sleeve for years, like, hey, you got to create, you got to put things out there. And I had a client a couple of years ago say, well, hey, you're telling me to do all this stuff, and I don't see you putting anything out there, right? Your Instagram's kind of light. Like, there's a couple pictures of the last vacation you took. Like, you talk a lot of crap on Twitter, okay, but like, what else are you doing? And I took that as a challenge, and I love those types of challenges. And I was like, you know what, you're right. I've always wanted to do a podcast. I've always wanted to create. I'm going to dedicate myself to this. So about a year ago, yeah, it's about a year ago, I started to this podcast was like pre-production for like 10 years, but I finally got it off the ground because uh, it's I realized something was happening in the corporate world where people were leaving their high-powered VP, SVP, EVP jobs at major corporations to go start something new, start something
Mm,
fresh. They weren't going to get another job. They were saying, I'm ready to be a founder. And they were doing this during the pandemic, right? Like,
mm,
a time where, all of us were scared and completely unsure what the future was going to look like. People were leaving like, mid six figure, high six figure jobs to go like work for nothing, right?
yeah,
And I was so fascinated by that. So I started a podcast called The Change Up. We've done about 40 episodes now,
cool.
and it's been really fascinating to me to just learn from these folks. Like, one of my first interviews was with the CEO of Buzzer, Bo Han, and Bo and I worked together at Microsoft way back in the day, and I knew a little bit of his story, but it was just so fascinating to me. He left. He was the head of sports partnerships at Twitter, and he left that job in the pandemic and took out the money from his 401k because he couldn't find a funder during the pandemic to pay the salaries of the employees that he had to keep
Wow.
this business going. And fast forward now a year and a half later, and that he's raised like $25 million, and he's off to the races. But that I was so fascinated to kind of learn what was it about that idea and that concept and the conviction to get going now, right? The
Mhm.
bravery in that. And so the whole podcast focuses on that. And it's been fun because now I can kind of point, if somebody does call me out for that and say, hey, what are you creating? I'm like, hey, I do this every single week, man. Check it
Yeah,
out. Like, I'm
yeah,
actually creating and learning. And it's been fun. I bet you're in a similar boat, right? Like, what I really enjoy about the podcast is the research and the understanding, and getting to
mhm,
know these guests. But then the kind of nerdy analytics part of me is like learning the new platforms, and learning the
100%.
difference between Riverside and Zencaster, learning about Buzzsprout, learning about which transcripting service should I use, how do I create things on Canva, like all of that stuff like makes me better at my podcast, but also
Mhm.
makes me have a stronger conversation with my potential clients who might want to be using some of these tools, right? I can give them my unbiased look at it because I'm saying, hey, I've tried them all, and here's what I've seen work for me, here's what I can work, what might work for you.
Yeah, it's so true, and I've been guilty of the talk without action at points in my career too.
Yeah.
I left VaynerMedia to come and do this 5 years ago, and at the time, talk about leaving money to make no money. We were making no money, so I had a lot of time and started a show. And I realized over the course of the last 5 years, so I started a show. That's kind of how this whole cycle got going for us. We had guests on that we just had no business talking to, et cetera, et cetera. And then that kind of created a service line for us. Well, we got really busy with the service line and servicing customers, and the show kind of fell by the wayside. And
Ah,
I've realized over the 5 years that when I am proactively creating, when I'm having conversations like this, when I'm testing these things, testing distribution methods, like how are we animating little clips to put out onto TikTok and Twitter, and how are those working against each other versus full episodes, all these little micro tests that you just do naturally when it's your thing. It just makes me so much better
exactly.
as a guide to whoever, because I know, and I've been sitting in their shoes, and it's this unique thing we have in our industry where we can go try anything that we're going to advise. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, you changing from being a professor to a practitioner, right? Like
Yeah,
rather than
yeah.
you're just up there trying to teach somebody something, you're like, no, I'm actually in it with you and trying to dig through this as well. And here's what I'm finding. Let me share some tips. It's much more fun and way more energy when you can kind of share like, here's what works for me, right? And
Yeah,
people go, okay, cool. If that's the way you're doing it, maybe I should do it that way.
100%. Well, Keith, I really appreciate you coming on. This has been great. I know we're kind of at the end of our time, but just before I
Yeah.
let you go, would love to know just what's top of mind for you right now. What are you seeing on the cutting edge? What has you really fired up and excited? Could be just the podcast or anything else that you're
Yeah.
seeing or working on.
Yeah, I think the evolution of audio is so exciting to me, and where it's going. Right, I think we as practitioners know that YouTube is like surprisingly one of the biggest platforms for podcasts right now.
Huge.
And so what I'm loving right now is the fact that just more and more indie publishers are starting to grow and starting to connect and starting to kind of build out IP, right? Like we've seen it with like Wondery has done this, and a few others have done this, where it's like creating IP as the core on audio and turning that into things that live on video. It might be YouTube or
Mm,
Snapchat or TikTok. It might be selling it to a Paramount Plus. It might be selling it to a streamer. But looking at that as like the sandbox to start is so exciting to me because for
mm.
so long it's been video, and I think that video leaves some people out, and I love that the fact that people are experimenting with multiple different mediums. So that's the one thing that I'm the most excited about.
Awesome. Cool. This has been so much fun. I've learned so much. Really appreciate you walking us through that process of what to think through when launching. For folks who want to keep up with you, your show, the business, is there one spot or a couple spots that they can check out?
Easiest place is on Twitter. It's at Keith R Hernandez. Make sure you put that middle initial R for my middle name Ross. But if you go Keith Hernandez, you'll get Keith Hernandez talking about his cat and baseball. Keith R Hernandez to learn more about the business. I'll share links to the show there, but I'll also share things about clients and work that we're up to.
Awesome. We'll link that all as well. We'll appreciate having you on, and hopefully we'll catch up soon.
Awesome. Thank you so much. It was great seeing you. Take care.